Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing what we believe are the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from those authored by Jane Austen to plays authored by Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the small business owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and even leverage insights from great literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the restoration of the best of Western civilization here at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Jesan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 184. Opening up from our book today with a poem. And I quote, to Edmund Clerihew Bentley. A cloud was on the mind of men, and wailing went the weather. Yea, a sick cloud upon the soul when we were boys together. Science announced nonentity, and art admired decay. The world was old and ended, but you and I were gay. Round us in antic order, their crippled vices came, lust that had lost its laughter, fear that had lost its shame. Like the white lock of Whistler that lit our aimless gloom, men showed their own white feather as proudly as a plume. Life was a fly that faded, and death a drone that stung. The world was very old indeed when you and I were young. They twisted even decent sin to shapes not to be named. Men were ashamed of honor, but we were not ashamed. Weak if we were and foolish, not thus we failed, not thus. When that black veil blocked the heavens, he had no hymns from us. Children we were, our forts of sand were even as weak as we. High as they went, we piled them up to break that bitter sea. Fools as we were in motley, all jangling and absurd. When all church bells were silent, our cap and bells were heard. Not all unhelped, we held the fort, our tiny flags unfurled. Some giants labored in that cloud to lift it from the world. I find again the book we found. I feel the hour that flings far out of fish-shaped Paumanok some cry of cleaner things. And green carnation withered as in forest fires that pass, roared in the wind of all the world 10 million leaves of grass. Or sane and sweet and sudden as a bird sings in the rain, truth out of Tusitala spoke and pleasure out of pain. Yea, cool and clear and sudden as a bird sings in the gray, Dunedin to Samoa spoke, and darkness unto day. But we were young. We lived to see God break their bitter charms. God and the good republic come riding back in arms. We have seen the city of man's soul, even as it rocked relieved. Blessed are they who did not see, but being blind, believed. This is a tale of those old fears, even of these emptied hells, and none but you shall understand the true thing that it tells. Of what colossal gods of shame could cow men and yet crash, of what huge devils hid the stars yet fell at a pistol flash. The doubts that were so plain to chase, so dreadful to withstand. Oh, who shall understand but you? Yea, who shall understand? The doubts that drove us through the night as we two talked amain, and day had broken on the streets, error broke upon the brain. Between us, by the peace of God, such truth can now be told. Yea, there is strength in striking root, and good in growing old. We have found common things at last, and marriage, and a creed. And I may safely write it now, and you may safely read. There are certain books that remind you of things you have seen other places. Partially that's because the books themselves influence other mediums, but also it's partially because we all have short memories. There are books that have been adapted to movies and usually not well. Then there are the films that would work better as books or stories. And of course, in our time of declining attention spans, dopamine driven distractions, and the technological hijacking of the brain, there are certain social media performances that don't translate to any other medium at all. I'm sure Neil Postman would have something to say about that, and I'm sure that none of it would be good. But before Postman, there was our author who wrote the poem I read just now, who we are covering today. The writer of over 80 books, several hundred poems, 200 short stories, 4,000 essays, which were mostly newspaper columns, and several plays. This author was prolific in the way that only a man, a denizen, such as it were, of the 19th century could be. And the book we are going to address ourselves to today is probably the most psychedelic story I've read by a 19th century author in a really, really long time. It starts out with the reader believing and contemplating and trying to accept the reality that he's building in one way, and ends with we believing a totally, completely different thing. Now, of course, you could say that all good literature accomplishes such a dramatic two-step, but only rarely does a piece of literature accomplish such a two-step. So, well, the term that I've heard used for this book is so paradoxically. Today on the show, we are exploring meaning and what it means for leaders from one of the more entertaining and profoundly Catholic books we've covered on this show, The Man Who Was Thursday, by the great Catholic apologist and prolific writer, G.K. Chesterton. Leaders, there is no dark side in literature. Matter of fact, it's all dark. The only thing that makes it look light or sheds any light upon it is the sun. And I'm joined today, back for this episode, from his last foray into the space during last year's mashup episode, where we talked about the weird intersections between Pink Floyd, All Quiet on the Western Front, and Lord of the Rings, is a growing friend of the show. This is the second time he's been on, so that's 2 more times than most folks. Neal Kalechofsky. How you doing today, Neal? How's it going?
I'm doing great, Hassan. How are you? There's no dark side of the moon, really. It's all dark.
That's right. I wondered if you were going to pick that up. Yes.
Oh, yes. You were not
um,
going to slip that by me.
I think after reading this book, I think that Chesterton would have been a big fan of Pink Floyd. I
I
think
could
he
see
would have.
that.
I
Yeah.
think he would have.
Yeah.
He would have shown up to all their shows in a rumpled suit, and he would have
Right.
critiqued them, with
Right.
that big mustache and the bad comb over. But it would have been sharp. It would have been ribald, but he
Yeah.
would have gotten the paradox. He would have
Yeah.
understood what they were trying to lean into or lean
Yeah.
at. So,
Well, the thing, and we talked about this a little bit last time, that's a little bit paradoxical. I think that's going to be our word for today,
yeah,
about Pink Floyd is that uh, these guys were in some ways godless rock and rollers, and yet they were really, crying out for faith, right?
oh,
They were
absolutely,
decrying the lack of faith, the lack of humanism, and what I think Chesterton might have said is you're looking in the wrong place.
right.
You're not you're trying to find God without, finding God.
Right. Well, he would have also, and we talked about this on the episode, the mashup episode that we did. We touched a little bit on this, but he would not have been a fan of the psychedelic experiments of Aldous Huxley. He would not have been a fan of
Yeah.
any of that.
No.
He would have, as a matter of fact, he would have, and you could tell from The Man Who Was Thursday how he goes after the Nietzscheans. He would
Right.
have seen that as a direct line from the Nietzschean worldview and would have rejected the dominoes all the way down the path.
Right.
Um, but I also think he would have been shocked by how popular Huxley got and then how influential he got, and that probably would have disappointed him. I can imagine that he would have taken that badly.
I think the fabulism he would love. It's the fact that it descends so quickly into hedonism. That's the
Right.
almost like there's no red, light at all on the,
Right.
you know,
There's no red light. There's no
it's a
stop.
kaboom right
It's a
down. Yeah,
kaboom. There's no
yeah,
William F. Buckley on the highway. It's just
yeah,
you
yeah.
going. Yeah.
Well, saying this much and no more, right?
Right.
No, it's
Yeah.
it's it's all the way. But you think of Lewis Carroll, right?
Right.
Who Chesterton must have. He may even have crossed. Did they? I'm not sure of the timeline whether they were contemporaries in any way, but certainly they were close enough literary contemporaries. And Lewis Alice in Wonderland is some pretty wild stuff, right? But it
Oh
doesn't
yeah.
descend. There's never an orgy in Alice in Wonderland, right? There's
No.
no be in or love in or anything like that. That would have been Lewis Carroll would have just been completely blown away by stuff like that.
Yep.
And then 100 years later, you have Grace Slick singing White Rabbit at Woodstock, and which my neighbor was at, by the way. He was telling me, and he saw that performance. And he
Really.
said, yeah, just as an aside, it was kind of funny. He sent me a clip of Grace Slick singing White Rabbit, and he says, I remember this like it was yesterday. And I wrote back, I said, I'll bet she doesn't.
Yeah, Chesterton was born in he was born in 1874. And looking up on Google just
Yeah,
because it's interesting that
wasn't
you
sort of Alice in Wonderland sort of I don't know. Go ahead, tell me.
yeah, so Alice in Wonderland was written in, let me go ahead and pull that up because I don't have it off the top of my head. Um Alice in Wonderland was written in 1865.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
right.
a little bit earlier than Chesterton was born. So he
Right.
not only would have been exposed to Carroll, it would have been one of those background influences that was
Yeah.
just sort of floating around there.
Yeah.
Now, how much he would have, shall we say, embraced Lewis Carroll, for
Right.
lack of a better term,
Yeah.
we don't know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Lewis Carroll had a long life in the middle of the 19th century. He
Yeah.
was born in, let me see, it was like 1836 or something. So he had a long and all, let me pull this up. He had a long lifespan.
And then,
And
and then I'll tell you the other guy who jumped to mind when I read,
sure.
besides the obvious C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, which
Yeah.
the influence is, jumping out at, like even in the poem you read,
Yep.
I noticed. So at some point he mentioned Dunedin, which,
Yes.
to be clear, I looked up on Wiki, and apparently it's an island somewhere in the South Pacific.
It is.
But in the Lord of the Rings, the Dunedain were the noblemen
The
who,
noblemen.
right, who survived the fall of Numenor and then come back to Middle Earth.
Right.
And there's no way that's a mistake or
No,
or a
no,
coincidence. Yeah.
no. So Lewis Carroll was born 1832. He died 1898.
Okay.
Alice in Wonderland was, like I said, was 1865. G.K. Chesterton was born in 1874, died in 1936.
Right.
So while Chesterton overlapped a little bit with the end of Carroll's life, most of Carroll's work would have been in the background, probably for him. Which it's weird to think about that because we tend to put these people on pedestals,
Sure.
literary, whatever. But
Right.
you know, like his relationship, like Chesterton's relationship with what was the author, the eugenicist, an author, Bernard Shaw, George Bernard
Okay.
Shaw, right?
Sure.
So he was a sparring partner against
Right.
George Bernard Shaw
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
for years, right?
Yeah.
And roundly opposed the Fabian Society, roundly opposed Fabian socialism, thought eugenics was nonsense.
Yeah.
There are some, depending upon what you read in his Wikipedia article, there are some intimations that maybe he might have been anti-Semitic, but maybe not. Nobody
Yeah. I
really
saw
knows
that
for
too.
sure,
Yeah.
you know. But it was one of those things where, you know, Carroll's in the air, Tolstoy's in the air, Dostoevsky's in the air, and these guys are just reading them like we read YouTubers. We're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's just the critical drinker over there, or that's
Yeah.
whoever that we're going to on YouTube.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. In 100 years, who knows? Who knows who's going
Yeah.
to be? Who knows
Yeah.
what
But
YouTuber will
it gets
rise
into
to
the
the
back
top?
of your mind somewhere, right?
Exactly.
The other guy that jumped to mind, unfortunately also known for his anti-Semitism, was Roald Dahl.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Some at the end, I was getting this is very Charlie and the Chocolate Factory a little bit, where people are just flying up in the air, and you know,
It is.
yeah,
It
and
is.
I think Dahl was much less. He must have been 50s and 60s. Again, I'm
Yeah,
guessing, but
yeah.
but I was actually kind of yeah, flashing on some Roald Dahl there at the end, but. And then I think I was telling you earlier before the podcast, some of this seems like the early movies of, Keystone Cops or,
Yes, yes.
when the anarchists are running around Europe, I picture them running around in stilted fashion like they're being filmed, in 1912 or something.
I had a Buster Keaton flashback
Yeah.
when the whole section occurs in the book where they are chasing them across the field and they're chasing them
Yeah.
through the
Yeah.
town, and it's this like chapters long chase.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's Benny Hill, man.
it's
It's a,
that's it. Yes. Oh my
yeah.
God. I'm glad you brought
They're
this
going
up.
like this.
Oh my God, they're going like this. And I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God, the Benny Hill music. Yakety sax. That's right.
Yeah, I still
Oh.
got that song stuck in my head. I remember Benny Hill
Oh
from
my God.
like 1980 British TV would come over and you could see like clips of Benny Hill like 11:30 at night or something. Yeah.
So this will tell you the just the age gap that we have. I was
Right.
exposed to Benny Hill. So I'll frame it this way. Before I would go to school in the mid 90s, before I go to high school, there were two programs I'd watch. If I got up early on PBS, I could watch the last 10 minutes of Benny Hill, where usually the last 10 minutes involved some lady in scanty clothes
Yes, it
running
did.
around doing something, and then the music would come up. And then I would immediately change from that to Sports Center, hosted by what's his name? The guy who's sort of gone off the rails lately on MSNBC, Keith Olbermann. Keith
Oh yeah.
Olbermann and Dan Patrick. Those are my
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
And this is before we knew how crazy Keith Olbermann was.
Yeah.
This is before Dan Patrick had a podcast, all this time, right? And Stuart Scott would come on sometimes,
Yeah.
and I'd watch Stuart Scott with Dan Patrick, and I would just watch Michael Jordan highlights and eat
Right.
my cereal, and then
Right.
I would go to school. Like that
Right.
was my whole entire that was part
Sure.
of my exposure
Yeah.
to like Benny Hill.
Yeah.
And now it's interesting. So my 9-year-old, we got a bunch of chickens on my property,
Right.
and like a bunch of chickens, like not a few, like 12 to 15. It's ridiculous for chicken farmers. And whenever he's chasing the chickens around, I play the Benny Hill music.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's basically yakety sax.
Yeah, like he's chasing the girl. Yeah.
Exactly.
He's got his hands out like this.
He's got his hands out the whole
You,
nine
you
yards.
could
Yeah.
not put that on TV today, I think. That would be
Oh, Benny Hill would be immediately canceled. Like immediately. It wouldn't even get out of the writer's
before the
room.
music ended, they would be
Yeah.
closing that show down. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, getting back to the Man Who Was Thursday. Let's
Right,
kind of
of course.
refocus this for just a minute.
Yes.
The Man Who Was Thursday was published in 1908. It is one of G.K. Chesterton's more famous books associated with him. It was written as an adventure story, a detective story, and as I put it in my writing, in my notes here, a boisterous narrative with an unexpected denouement. And it is an unexpected denouement.
Yeah.
Like it takes an immediate left turn in the last two chapters,
Right.
and you don't know what he's going to do. Like I look at the book and I go, oh my gosh, this is so short, because the chapters are short. It's real easy to read.
Yeah.
It's written in a flowing narrative style. You get to the last two chapters and you're like, how is he gonna bring it home? He has to bring
Right.
it home somehow.
Right.
How is he going to turn this corner? And then he turns the corner and you wind up in this weird,
Right.
this is the psychedelic part. You wind up in this weird psychedelic cul-de-sac
Sure.
with robes
Right.
and dudes sitting in chairs.
Right.
It's very much Lord of the Rings.
It's
like
very Lord of the Rings, or
Very
or
Lord.
That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis, where they're all
Yes.
sitting in robes at
Yep.
St. Anne's at the end.
Yep.
The victory has come, and they're sort of, they're just
Mhm.
kind of reflecting on what their role in the entire saga has been. I was
Right.
completely channeling Lewis when I
Right.
was reading that. Yeah.
And and there's no preparation for any of that. It just sort of
Right.
dumps into it, and you're like,
Right.
oh, I okay, I didn't realize it was going to be this kind of game.
Right.
Um, the other thing about the book is it continues to confound readers. Like it was, so this is 2026 when we're recording this episode. Um, it is 118 years
Yeah.
since this book was published, which is
Yeah.
weird for me to think about.
Yeah.
But in the 118 years, I don't think anybody's gotten their arms around the man who was Thursday.
That's fair. You know, someday you're talking to me, but I would love to introduce you to my friend Bill, who's a profound. I'm pointing in that direction because he lives over there.
He was over there.
You know, so your viewers can see I'm right over
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah. He's right
Bill.
off screen.
Right.
He's over
Yeah.
there.
Right. And Bill and I, first of all, we belong to a C.S. Lewis book club together, but he is one of the best read persons that I know. And he's a huge Chesterton fan. And maybe we could do a follow-up to this at some point where he comes on. And
Okay.
he's just, I think you'll find him just an interesting, profound kind of guy. Very committed Catholic, very serious religious fellow and a deep thinker. So I'm going to ask him that very question, like basically, and I should have done this in preparation for the show, but of course I didn't. Which is Bill's hard to get hold of, by the way, because in keeping with Chesterton and Tolkien, he doesn't have a cell phone.
There you
So
go.
he is hard. I actually have to physically walk over to his house, which is like, 2.5 blocks.
That's a lot. That's
That's
a
a
lot of commitment.
lot. I mean, I can't just text him. What? Yeah. What is this? 1908?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What are we doing? This isn't 100. This is 118 years ago.
But he's talked a lot about G.K. Chesterton, and he would enjoy this conversation. So at some point, putting the two of you together will be my. I will enjoy that conversation from my chair to the side. Um,
Awesome.
but so to me, I can't separate because I have such a Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings was a massive influence on me growing up.
Hmm.
So is C.S. Lewis. It colored a lot of my worldview, both of them together both as a kid where I kind of sort of thought Middle Earth was real,
Hmm.
you
Oh
know,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, or that I knew it wasn't quite real, but it should be real. Like
Right. Yeah, yeah,
there should
yeah.
be a place like that. Right. Seemed like a better place than the one I was actually at. Much later as an adult, where I started to realize the profound philosophy that was underneath it all. And, certainly there's some, to me, the most obvious, first of all, there's a lot of literary mechanisms in here where I go, Tolkien, 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 or
Yeah.
literally throughout, like here in your poem, I don't know if you can see this on the screen, but over here
Yeah.
in your poem, I wrote very JRR, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It
right.
is.
Yeah, because
Yes.
it is. It's the first of all, the fact that there's a poem like that, in Tolkien, every once in a while the hobbits would just start, reciting a
Oh
poem,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah. They're just like running around reciting
Yeah.
poetry and
And
eating
sometimes
second
like
breakfast.
can
Yeah.
you imagine like a modern literary work where suddenly someone just read a poem for 3 pages? I mean,
No,
no.
no, no,
No, the
no.
reader would be gone at verse 2. Right. Yeah. I have to give you some that I did do a little wiki search or a little R&D before this. And here's an interesting thing. The person to whom he dedicated that poem is Edmund Clerihew Bentley. Do
Yes.
you know what a Clerihew is?
I have no idea what a Clara is.
Neither did I, but Wiki, boom, nailed it. Clerihew apparently is named after this guy, a
Mm.
four-line poem that's autobiographical. And
Oh.
so it's like there's some. I was actually looking a few of these up. Unfortunately, I don't have them like right here.
Hmm.
Um, uh, but you can look them up. Some of them are cute. So of course, there's Clerihew poetry examples, right?
Hmm.
And Albert Einstein, though he was divine, he made the world spin with a theory of time. Things like that, right? Kind of,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
quick. Um, uh, okay, I'm just seeing these right now. Marie
Yeah. Yeah.
Curie discovered radium, you see. She glowed with pride. Oh dear. In her
Mm.
lab,
Oh
she wrote
dear,
about. She also died of radium poisoning. So
she did. Oof,
that's a little dark, but you get the idea. Anyway, who knew those poems had a name and someone invented them? Apparently, it was this friend of Chesterton's.
that's
So
amazing.
yeah, and
That's amazing. And
they're
they're called
called Clara
Clarihues.
Hughes. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing. I did not know that at all, and
This is my
that's
gift
why
to
we do
you,
this
my
show.
friend. You
Thank
impart
you.
knowledge to me. I give these little
Bon
tidbits
mots.
of trivia.
Well,
Someday you'll be at
so
a dinner conversation and you'll say, someone will say, "Does anyone?" Can you
does
imagine
anyone know
like
what a Clairview is?
like you're like you're on an airplane and someone says, "Is there a doctor on this plane? Is there anyone on this
Yeah.
plane that knows what a Clairview is?" Turns out like we have a poet. This will save his life.
Weirdly enough,
Yeah.
I do.
Strangely enough, ma'am, I am familiar
I,
with the Clairview. Sounds like a
that's right.
musical instrument. I play the
It
clarinet.
does.
Yeah.
I play the Clairview
I've
along
heard
with
it.
the harpsichord, and I failed at it. Now I'm
Yeah.
switched to the piano,
I,
and I'm totally better.
wasn't there a Clairview in Jethro Tull or something? The Clairview player, some guy off to the side, yeah. Like some bizarre.
Oh, more like in the Grateful Dead. Oh my
Yeah.
lord. Anyway,
Oh yeah.
they would have had a Clairview for
Yeah.
sure.
I'm
Oh
going
my
to tell you
gosh.
a funny Grateful Dead. It's not on this show, but another
Not on
Grateful
the
Dead.
show.
I
Not
have
on
a
the
great
show.
Grateful Dead story. But okay,
We'll say
so
that.
back to Chesterton, who never encountered the. Although it's interesting to speculate, what would he have thought of the dead? You know?
Hmm. Are you ready to elevate your leadership journey through exploring the wisdom of the ages? Subscribe to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast on all major podcast platforms, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube Music. You can also find us everywhere else podcasts are available. If you find value in our episodes, please leave a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. We need those reviews to grow, and it is truly the easiest way to help other leaders and lovers of literature discover this show. And thank you for your support. I don't know, so here's a follow-up question for this. So I asked you this question when we were talking about All Quiet on the Western Front and Lord of the Rings in our mashup episode, and you gave me a very interesting answer that has stuck with me um, for a long time now. And this is why I have fascinating folks like yourself on the show, because I get to ask you good questions and you give me stuff and it sticks with me and it incorporates into other things that I think. And the question that I asked you was at the end of this, towards the end of that episode, um, will there ever be another writer like Tolkien? Will English literature ever be able to produce another writer like Tolkien? And you said probably not, because Tolkien was sort of the pinnacle of the mountain of all of English culture and
Yeah.
society and thought. It all sort of concentrated at a tip of the spear into that man and his output. Okay, but when we look, not but and when we look at the history of 19th century literature in England, you have Lewis Carroll, you have Charles Dickens, you have G.K. Chesterton, you have George Bernard Shaw, you have Robert Louis Stevenson, you have you have C.S. Lewis on the tail end of this, and of course you have Tolkien. You have these lions, these literary lions, Rudyard Kipling, who, by the
Sure.
way, we haven't covered any of Kipling's work on this show yet. We're sort of working our way around to it. We will cover Rudyard Kipling coming up here fairly soon. I'm trying to find the right text to bring to folks. But the 19th century literary tradition in England was so rich.
Right.
It's almost stunning. It's like it's the height of a literary culture. Um, the Man Who Was Thursday comes along at a weird time when the Boer Wars have occurred.
Right.
Um, England is having a little bit of trouble holding on to its colonies, but it's always had trouble because it's England. So they don't really think that it's anything really interesting that's happening there. But what is happening that's more so interesting is the continent is getting ready to roil literally 12 years later with World War One, 10 years later with World War One. Like you're going to get into World War One and we're going to be off to the races, right? I mean, this is the beginnings of, or the foundation is being laid for the death of the British Empire. but nobody knows it at that point. Nobody
Sure.
realizes it at that point, right? So I say all this to say, or that's the content I lay for this question. The Man Who Was Thursday, the reason we can't get our arms around it and pigeonhole it into some space. Is it because it is truly the heir to that entire English tradition? Was Chesterton trying to bring everything into this one book and say sort of make a final statement?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the the right person to answer that question, but I'll give it my.
Where's Bill? Where's that
Yeah,
guy?
where's Bill? Ask that same question to Bill when he comes along. So, but I think that the the reason we have our one of the reasons we have difficulty getting our arms around Chesterton is that I think we in 2026 have difficulty. There used to be saying there's no second act in American life, right? Which once they know you as an actor, that's it. You're an actor forever. Once you're a playwright forever. You can't do different things, or it's very difficult. I think that kind of is broadly true, where particularly in the world of the internet, we pinhole people as you're this, and once someone is known as a Christian apologist, well, they can't also be funny, right? They can't also be indulge in, what we would call almost psychedelic, literature, because that's just not things that go together, right?
Mm,
So I'm saying that's kind of the shallow view, right?
yeah.
So I think one of the reasons, and I think one of the reasons Tolkien actually slips by that is because his books are theoretically written for children. They're not, of course, they're profoundly deep works for adults, but he slips it in there, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
C.S. Lewis does that with Narnia, right? Because it's in
Mm-hmm.
some ways we read Narnia to our kids because we think of them as
Mm-hmm.
kids' stories, but of course they're not. They're much more than that. But that was, I think, some of the additional genius of Tolkien, where I don't think he sat down and said, well, here's a way to get a Christian message across in a way that, people will not,
Yeah.
object to immediately in this world of, material anarchy that I see all around me. I don't think he sat down and thought that, but it was part of his genius to kind of develop the delivery mechanism in such a,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I've read the Lord of I know I have a Lord of the Rings shaped head, so I talk about it a lot, but I read it as a kid, I read it as a young adult, I've read it as an adult, I've read it very recently. I've read it to my kids, with my kids. So I think that's part of it. I think he doesn't it's difficult to put him in a pigeonhole, uh, and he's not famous enough in the way that Tolkien is. Just so, they're not going to make a movie out of the man who called, the man who was Thursday.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas, the Tolkien works are so famous that they kind of blow away a lot of those sort of, well, I'm not sure what pigeonhole do I put this in kind of objection. So that's one reason, I think. The other reason is something that you touched on, which is he's so very British, right? He's,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
to me, so I was telling you earlier, I had this characterization of Chesterton. I want to save it for the show. Here it is.
Yeah.
I think if you took C.S. Lewis and Winston Churchill and put them together, you'd get G.K. Chesterton, right? I think that's my image of G.K. Chesterton. Right? You know? And by the way, I didn't realize until actually after I read the book, he was a big guy. He was almost 300 pounds. Yeah,
Oh yeah, he was a big boy.
he was
Oh
a
yeah.
he was a big boy, which makes me wonder about Sunday because correct me if I'm wrong, but Sunday's a big guy.
Sunday's a big
Yeah,
yes, yes,
yeah,
yes. That's how
yeah,
he's described as sort of this sort of all encompassing.
yeah. Like at the end, he's almost like I'm telling
Right.
you, it's like the kid in again, I'm Roald Dahl. Who's the kid who like or somebody takes the bubble down and they end up blowing up to Veruca Salt or something? Doesn't she blow
Oh
like
yeah,
yeah
yeah, 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 yeah,
yeah
yeah.
like three times her size or something like that? So I think also though we're just that is a vanished archetype. The Winston Churchill, the guy who first of all was grounded in certain moral certitudes, but also could get along with just about anyone, right?
Hmm.
Always had the right thing to say at the right time, like Churchill's famous, the woman who says, Mr. Churchill, if you were my husband, I would poison you. And he said, Madame, if you were my wife, I would drink it.
I would drink
Yeah.
it. Well,
Lines like
well,
that. Who,
lines
who
like
could,
that,
who
yeah.
could pull a line like that off today? I mean, come on, I don't see Tom Cruise nailing a line like that in a movie.
No, no, no. The problem is all those guys are on Twitter. That's the problem. They're
Yeah,
all on Twitter,
yeah, that's it. Yeah, maybe that's where
and
you
that's
go
it.
for. Yeah, for the great the zap. So so I think it's partly that he's just, I mean, he's almost like a Roman senator. He's so far
Yeah,
back and
yeah.
so archetypal that you can't. He's almost not a real person. We don't see people like that anymore.
Well, and it's interesting that you talk about his weight and sort of the rumpledness that Chesterton had, and then we'll head back to the book here because I want
Right.
to turn the corner, start talk about some
Sure.
other themes that I want to talk about today. But it's interesting you talk about his weight, his rumpledness. He struggled with gout and gluttony and those kinds of things.
Sure.
Um, and we live in a post-television era. Like one of the I would love to write a Substack essay on this because I've been thinking about this off and on for the last 4 or 5 years. How no one really is appreciating how much that box in your house called a television has gotten pulled apart in the last 15 years. It's
Right.
got pulled apart by streaming. It's been pulled apart by different distribution channels.
Right.
It's been pulled apart by the death of attention. It's
Right.
been pulled apart by the transition of advertising and marketing technology.
Yep.
And it's primarily been pulled apart by the creation of the internet. The
Yeah.
second you could have an infinite number of channels, and the second that infinite number of channels was attached to what in the future will be an AI temple in your
Sure.
pocket, which is
Sure.
currently a temple in your pocket.
Right.
Once that was attached, once those two things came together from thank you, Steve Jobs, the explosion that was going to happen was for the television a thermonuclear explosion. Now, don't get me wrong, the physical object still exists on your wall,
Sure.
but what it meant when JFK, and this is where I mentioned Neil Postman, amusing ourselves to death, right? Postman didn't want to talk about digital. He didn't care about any of that. His whole focus was on what TV meant for reality. That's why Amusing Ourselves to Death is such an amazing book written back in 1985. But Postman noted that, and I'm going to tie this to Chester in a minute, but noted that what TV meant was images mattered more than the medium, right? So the medium is the message for sure. Marshall McLuhan, he backed that up, but both of those things were intricately tied together, and so you couldn't have a sweating Richard Nixon on
Sure.
TV in 1960.
Sure.
You had to have JFK pack on the pancake makeup.
Sure.
Fast forward to our era, one of the most notorious changes I've seen in the last 2 years is how we have gone from, as a culture, at least on internet culture, the online culture, from being very, very positive about everybody's body to now Ozempic face.
Right.
And we've done that in 2 years. All of a
Right.
sudden, body positivity went out the door
Right.
because Ozempic is here, right?
Right.
And so body positivity wasn't really body positivity. It
Right.
was, I don't have a get rich or a get weight loss quick over system so that I can show up as an image, which is what we have primarily made our mode of messaging since the rise of television. Um, I don't have that tool to go to that mode. And so I'm going to be positive and I'm going to shape what the tool says
Right.
about me.
Right.
Chesterton, to your point, this is why that archetype no longer exists, because of TV, because of the internet, and because of Ozempic. That I don't care how quippy he is, if he's 300 pounds,
Right. You'll
you can't
never.
put that guy, he won't make it.
Yeah.
He won't make it.
Yep.
And that's a real shame.
It's in some ways, Hassan, I feel like we're describing the modern Tower of Babel. that is just building itself higher and higher, and eventually is going to come crashing down. The because I mean, I guess I guess your viewers will get the idea. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of modern culture. I find it horrific, most of it. And the to me, what I mourn most is the death of books. But behind the book has to be the novelist, and behind the novelist has to be the culture that produces the novelist. The idea that the novelist was rewarded. Chesterton was probably rewarded from a young age for being quippy and for being sharp and for having the bon mot and for, or however you pronounce it, but I don't speak French amongst my many defects. That's one of them. And but there was a time where that was, sort of lauded. But you mentioned Twitter. So would the Chesterton of today have been on Twitter? The problem is I can't distinguish the Chesterton on Twitter from the bot on Twitter.
Right.
I could be
Right.
talking to
Right.
to nothing. And the that just leads to chaos. I don't know, was it Chesterton who just made that witty observation about Mario Rubio, or was it an AI whose server is somewhere in Tierra del Fuego? I mean, I have no idea.
Hmm. Yep.
So
Yep.
it's there's a lot about modern culture that you know, it's hard to see, and maybe this will, if you want to lead us back to the book, it's hard to see the way out, where we go from here to oh, okay, we got to a kind of better place. Um, One last thing, and we do want to get back to the book, but I sort of dabble in the side with some writing, and
Hmm.
I wrote I'm writing a screenplay, a movie screenplay
Hmm.
that is in the 80s. I traveled around a bit. I'm just going to make this super quick, I promise. But it does tie back. And I started my travels in Amsterdam, literally landing 1986, no idea where I was, very little money, one-way ticket, didn't speak the
Hmm.
language, and I'm setting the opening movie scene. I'm writing this actually for my daughter who said, "Gee, you should write something," because I've been telling them stories of these travels forever. And
Yeah.
so I'm doing it in the form of a fictionalized movie script. And it starts off with the fictional me in the travel bureau, which was a true, actually happened, standing there in the travel bureau. And I won't take you through it except to say, there's a voiceover saying, "Okay, I have no money or very little money. I don't speak the language. I don't know where I am. I don't know where I'm sleeping that night." And it was better. And it was, and the point of the story is me bumbling through Europe for 8 months, which actually happened, right? But nothing bad,
Yeah.
nothing bad. It
Yeah.
was all fun. I met some really interesting people, had some great times, and that's what I was trying to convey to my daughter, which was, I think it might have been better, and
Better.
I think we may have created something in the internet and social media. Parts of it are great. Like I can look up G.K. Chesterton on Wiki and in 5 seconds, learn what a Clerihew
Hmm.
is. I had no
Hmm.
idea 24 hours ago. Um, and but I'm I kind of think the negatives maybe outweigh the positives.
I don't think you're alone in
Yeah,
thinking that.
yeah, no, I don't think I am.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah. And well, I think Chesterton might have something for us. So
right.
back to the book, back to
Back to the book.
the man who was Thursday. So we're gonna go into chapter two,
Okay.
The Secret of Gabriel Syme. In my edition, it's on page 10. I'm gonna go down to the bottom of it here, and I'm gonna go into an argument that Chesterton was having with a couple of people, and this is where I sort of began to understand a little, or at least I thought I began to understand what it is that Chesterton was trying to pull off with this book. So Gabriel Syme is a detective. I'm going to sort of lay the groundwork here. He's a detective, and he's on an investigation of an anarchist named at this point named Gregory, right? And Gregory presents himself as being erudite, as being polite, as being formal. All of the things that I said about 19th century British culture come together, right? in Gregory. And Gregory's trying to explain to Syme, after they have a poetry battle in the first chapter, what exactly it is that this idea of anarchism is about. So I'm going to read a couple of different sections from here as Gregory's answers to Syme. On page 10, and I quote, "It does seem to have a moral underneath all its gaiety," assented Syme. "But may I ask you two questions? You need not fear to give me information because, as you remember, you very wisely extorted from me a promise not to tell the police, a promise I shall certainly keep. So is it in mere curiosity that I make my queries? First of all, what is it really all about? What is it you object to? You want to abolish government?" "To abolish God," said Gregory, opening the eyes of a fanatic. We not only want to upset a few despotisms and police regulations, that sort of anarchism does exist, but it is a mere branch of the nonconformists. We dig deeper and we blow you higher. We wish to deny all those arbitrary distinctions of vice and virtue, honor and treachery, upon which mere rebels base themselves. The silly sentimentalists of the French Revolution talked of the rights of man. We hate rights as we hate wrongs. We have abolished right and wrong. And right and left," added Syme with a simple eagerness. "I hope you will abolish them too. They are much more troublesome to me." "You spoke of a second question," snapped Gregory. "With pleasure," resumed Syme. "In all your present acts and surroundings, there is a scientific attempt at secrecy. I have an aunt who lived over a shop, but this is the first time I have found people living from preference under a public house. You have a heavy iron door. You cannot pass it without submitting to the humiliation of calling yourself Mr. Chamberlain. You surround yourself with steel instruments, which make the place, if I may say so, more impressive than homelike. May I ask why, after taking all this trouble to barricade yourselves in the bowels of the earth, you then parade your whole secret by talking about anarchism to every silly woman in Saffron Park?" Gregory smiled. "The answer is simple," he said. "I told you I was a serious anarchist, and you do not believe me, nor do they believe me. Unless I took them into this infernal room, they would not believe me." Syme smoked thoughtfully and looked at him with interest. Gregory went on. Now, pause. This is the key piece right here. This is when I thought, Chesterton, you're onto something. "The history of the thing might amuse you," he said. When first I became one of the new anarchists, I tried all kinds of respectable disguises. I dressed up as a bishop. I read up all about bishops in our anarchist pamphlets, in superstition and the vampire and priests of prey. I certainly understood from them that bishops are strange and terrible old men keeping a cruel secret from mankind. I was misinformed. When on my first appearing in an Episcopal gaiters in a drawing room, I cried out in a voice of thunder, "Down, down, presumptuous human reason." They found out in some way that I was not a bishop at all. I was nabbed at once. Then I made up as a millionaire, but I defended capital with so much intelligence that a fool could see I was quite poor. Then I tried being a major. Now I am a humanitarian myself, but I have, I hope, enough intellectual breadth to understand the position of those who, like Nietzsche, admire violence, the proud, mad war of nature, and all that, you know. I threw myself into the major. I drew my sword and waved it about constantly. I called out blood abstractedly like a man calling for wine. I often said, "Let the weak perish. It is the law." Well, it seems majors don't do this. I was nabbed again. At last, I went in despair to the president of the Central Anarchist Council, who is the greatest man in Europe. "What is his name?" asked Syme. "You would not know it," answered Gregory. "That is his greatness. Caesar and Napoleon put all their genius into being heard of, and they were heard of. He puts all his genius into not being heard of, and he is not heard of. But you cannot be for 5 minutes in the room with him without feeling that Caesar and Napoleon would have been children in his hands." He was silent and even pale for a moment, and then resumed. "But whenever he gives advice, it is always something as startling as an epigram, and yet as practical as the Bank of England. I said to him, 'What disguise will hide me from the world? What can I find more respectable than bishops and majors?' He looked at me with his large but indecipherable face. 'You want a safe disguise, do you? You want a dress which will guarantee you harmless, a dress in which no one would ever look for a bomb?' I nodded. He suddenly lifted his lion's voice. 'Why, then, dress up as an anarchist, you fool!' he roared so that the room shook. 'Nobody will ever expect you to do anything dangerous then.' And he turned his broad back on me without another word. I took his advice and have never regretted it. I preached blood and murder to those women day and night, and, by God, they would let me wheel their perambulators."
Hide in
This
plain sight.
is the yes. This is the crux of the man who was Thursday. Let's talk about anarchists.
Okay.
In the year of our Lord 2026, we proclaim that we have no anarchists. And yet, anarchists were a real problem in the late 19th century and well into the middle quarter of the 20th century. Their actions inspired politicians, activists, feminists, artists, poets, philosophers, the crazy, and of course, the power hungry. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand kicked off the First World War, and the trials of the murderers Leopold and Loeb, the crime of the century in 1936, further cemented the ideas of burning everything down of anarchists into popular culture. The analogy that we have to draw here is a very simple one. Anarchists back in the day were what terrorists are to the postmodern mind now. Men who have no other desire but to deconstruct or burn down the world around them. And when I was reading this book, a quote came to me, a very famous quote, actually, from the 2008 film, The Dark Knight. And it's rather instructive here. So I'm going to read the whole quote. This is where Alfred Pennyworth, played by the great Michael Caine, and Bruce Wayne, played by Christian Bale, are watching a video of this new villain that has shown up in Gotham City. A man who, Chesterton would like this, a man who laughs as he burns everything down. And I quote from Bruce Wayne, "Targeting me won't get their money back." He's talking about mobsters. "I knew the mob wouldn't go down without a fight, but this is different. They crossed a line." Alfred Pennyworth, "You crossed the line first, sir. You squeezed them. You hammered them to the point of desperation. And in their desperation, they turned to a man they didn't fully understand." Bruce Wayne, "Criminals aren't complicated, Alfred. You just have to figure out what he's after." Mr. Pennyworth, "With all due respect, Mr. Wayne, perhaps this is a man you don't fully understand either. A long time ago, I was in Burma. My friends and I were working for the local government. They were trying to buy the loyalty of tribal leaders by bribing them with precious stones. But their caravans were being raided in a forest north of Rangoon by a bandit. So we went looking for the stones. But in 6 months, we never met anybody who traded with him. One day, I saw a child playing with a ruby the size of a tangerine. The bandit had been throwing them away." Bruce Wayne, "So why steal them?" Alfred, and this is the killer line here. "Well, because he thought it was good sport. Because some men aren't looking for anything logical. Because some men aren't looking for anything logical. Like money. They can't be bought or bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn."
Let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
Do you think Osama bin Laden really thought he was going to destroy America by killing 3,000 people on 9/11? Or he just wanted to watch those towers burn?
I think Osama bin Laden thought two things. And that's a great question. I think he thought two things. Just like the Joker or the Dark Knight thought two things. And I think they are twin tracks upon which the train of anarchy or terrorism or chaos runs. The first thing he thought was that the United States was a weak horse. He actually said this.
They always think that.
Always. And he didn't care that history has consistently proven that we are not.
Right.
He didn't care about GDP.
Right.
He didn't care about military prowess. He didn't care about any of the on paper reasons why we're not. He didn't care. He said the lesson that Osama bin Laden was seeking to deliver on one rail of that track was the same lesson that the Viet Cong taught everybody back in the 60s and 70s, that if you just culturally outlast the Americans, they will go home. And that makes them weak. That's the first thing Osama bin Laden thought. The second thing Osama bin Laden thought was that, and again, because he's a fanatic, this is the fanaticism, he thought Islam has been around for 1400 years by this point. The Americans have only been around 200 and some odd years. Right. We're eternal. They're not.
Right.
We win at the end of the day. So all we have to do is play an eternity game with weak-willed and cowardly people, and we'll win. And that's the mistake that the anarchists and the terrorists and the people who want to watch the world burn always make, because fanatics can never understand. They don't have a theory of mind of other people. They only have a theory of mind of themselves, and they project
it's a form
that
of
to
narcissism.
everyone else.
It's a form of extreme narcissism. But,
oh God, yes.
And I think it is also often wrapped up in the artist's personality as well. I mean, everyone knows that Hitler was a failed artist, and that was part of the thing that that drove him. Stalin was a failed theologian. He was in the seminary for a while. I guess when you start shooting people, they move you out. That's the
they kind of let you go from that.
Maybe this isn't for you. Yeah. But so the idea that there, but I think that culture clash, or that misunderstanding, goes both ways, and that's what makes that line from that movie so compelling, because I think the civilized person has a great deal of difficulty understanding someone who really just wants to rip everything down.
You know that we have other ways for you to engage with this show, right? We have bonus episodes featuring interviews with interesting guests, working, thinking, and of course writing at the intersection of leadership and literature. We have shorter episodes, 15 minutes long, relaunched for this season, featuring introductions of our books and the background of our featured authors, from Augustine to Jane Austen and Ernest Hemingway to Joan Didion. So, listen, subscribe, and check out those other formats, and tell all your friends in leadership and literature about this show. The civilization,
for the fun of it sometimes.
The civilized person, and this is what I turned 21 3 weeks after September 11th. And a lot of guys from my generation 20 years ago went to Afghanistan.
Right.
And went to Iraq. I know a lot of those guys. A lot of those guys are my friends. They went and they came back, and they've told me what they saw when they went. And on the one hand, we can do the hand-wringing thing that we always do in America about war, like we're doing it right now as we go around and around with Iran. We're doing the hand-wringing thing again.
Yep.
And by the way, that's one of the negative lessons that we learned about Vietnam, from Vietnam. We can always hand-wring and scream about a quagmire. I got into an argument the other day about a guy who's like, oh, this is just going to be a quagmire. I'm like, we're 3 days in. Yeah. Or we're 3 weeks in.
I know. That's the astonishing thing to me, where you say, well, we're winning in every single way you can win a war, and it's 3 weeks. And you're already declaring it a quagmire?
And you're already declaring it a quagmire. Yeah. Number one, there's no boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Number two, like, even if there are boots, if we do put boots on the ground, you can't, the conditions for a quagmire don't, what are you talking about?
Because, and we're wandering far from Chesterton here. I realize, and we will get back, but I think at the back of that is wouldn't it be great if it was a quagmire? We want it to be a quagmire. Boy, that'll show
the facile desire that exists on both the political right and the political left in our country for everything to be clean and effortless.
Yes, and add to that also what we were talking about earlier, this bizarre world we find ourselves in 2026, where we want everything wrapped up in like an hour-long TV show. Well, it's been an hour, so I think the war should be over.
Jack Ryan should have gotten the bad guys.
Yeah, I mean,
they should have all been shot.
Didn't they get the bad guy yet?
Like, didn't the Black Widow beat up on all the 6'5", 250-pound dudes with her legs, and aren't we all done by this point? Yeah. Like, it's done.
It's a this is all part and parcel of the ongoing cultural discussion you and I have been having, and we do want to get back to Chesterton, but I think I guess to loop this back to Chesterton, it's important, I think, if people read this book, to realize anarchists in 1908 were a real thing. They weren't just people with handlebar mustaches, sort of, Keystone copying their way around the world. They would, by the way, two American presidents were shot by anarchists. One died right away, McKinley, and who was the other one? Was it
Was it
Cleveland?
was it Taft or Cleveland? I think it was Cleveland. It was
I think it was
Cleveland. Grover Cleveland.
Cleveland.
Yeah.
And whether was he an anarchist, like he had an A on his forehead? I don't know about that, but he didn't have he was one of these people who just wanted to, rip down. He didn't have a coherent political philosophy that said, I shoot the president and then good things happen, right?
Right.
No, it was
Right.
just rip down the world around you, and that was there's a real thing to that, and I think Chesterton was it's easy to see these people as buffoonish today, but
Hmm.
they were really dangerous. They did really dangerous things.
They were they were they were dangerous men in those times,
Yeah,
and the spirit of anarchy, which you'll appreciate this in some form or another, which is the spirit of Cain, right?
yeah,
From
sure,
Genesis, Genesis 5, right?
right,
It's that same spirit. It's the spirit of envy. It's the spirit of jealousy. It's the spirit of resentment. It's the spirit of entitlement. Osama bin Laden, to go back to this example for just a minute, believed he was entitled to the Islamic empire that he thought he
right.
deserved.
And if he didn't have it, he was going to kick down every toy around him.
There you go.
Yeah,
This, like the Joker in The Dark Knight, believes he's entitled to the chaos that he foments. He's entitled to that. Another great moment in that movie is when the convicts are on the boat, and the Joker like gives them a bomb to like blow up the boat with the civilians, or they could blow up their own boat. And the one conflict, and this is and this is where now you get into like progressive ideas of humanity versus actual humanity. The convict on the boat gets up and takes the explosive device away from the warden, or whatever, the trigger away from the warden on the boat, who's getting ready to do the thing, right? Blow up the other boat. And he's like, I'm going to do what you should have done 10 minutes ago, right? And he sits down and he does nothing, right? He gets to be the hero in that moment. But because he recognizes that even though I'm a violent criminal, there's certain places I can't even go to, which is very much a progressive post 20th century, not post 20th century, a progressive post World War II way of looking at the world. It's the outcome of the Nuremberg trials. We're the good guys. We put the bad guys on trial. We don't appeal to God, because why would we do that? Instead,
right,
we appeal to a secular morality.
right,
Secular morality will judge you, but it won't provide any meaning, because
right.
secular morality is based off of this reductionist mindset, this materialist reductionist mindset. And Chesterton, in talking about Nietzsche, and this is what I hooked on, in that section where he puts the words of Nietzsche into Gregory's mouth, the anarchist's mouth, he was drawing a philosophical line from nihilism directly to anarchy. If you believe in nothing,
Yeah.
if you believe the Nietzschean lie, then the only clearing at the end of the path for you is burning the world down. That's the only clearing.
Here's a interesting bit of trivia I want to lay on you.
Yeah.
You might find this. Um, so in the you mentioned Cain, and this made me think of the Bible. Do you know the Bible story? Of course you do, the Noah Bible story, where God
Yes.
comes to Noah and says, the world is filled with lawless violence. Basically,
Yep.
think of it as another term for anarchy. And I'm going to send another flood, and these are the things going to happen. Do you know what the word in Hebrew is for lawless violence?
No, I don't. What is
Hamas.
the word?
Hamas. The same term that the Hamas, the
Yeah.
Islamic movement. Now, that doesn't mean that's not why they picked the term. It's an they came in Arabic. It's an acronym that stands for Islamic Liberation Movement, but it happens to be the exact same word. Now, if you don't see a little bit of a wow moment in that, because that word's been around for 3,500 years. It's
So
Hamas.
there's
It's the
so
same
there's
word.
there's there is something going on in the there's something we're missing as modern Western folks, but I also think
You
there's
can look
something
that
we're
up, by the way.
missing.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, no, no.
Go ahead.
I'm going to look that up. But I'm going to go on this premise. So there's something we're missing as modern Western folks, and I think guys like Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pajot. There's a certain line of folks that are trying to draw us back to it. And I
Right.
think Chesterton was early on this. Young was kind of in the middle. And now we've got other folks. I already mentioned Pajot. I mentioned Jordan Peterson and others, even to a certain degree, Lex Friedman, although he's kind of shaky, but who are trying to bring us back to this thread. And it's the thread that we keep missing. And the thread is the thread of the logos, the thread of the word, right? And so the word can be used to, obviously, to create, but the word can also be used to your point about Hamas, interestingly enough, to destroy. Words have meaning.
Words have
And
meaning. Yes. And I think that, and I think this does loop back to the man who was Sunday. I think ultimately, without God, as you say, the Nuremberg trials, we're going to punish you because you violated some secular, morality that we're kind of inventing in real time here, as opposed to, you have broken the law of God. Um, as you point out, the Nazis could legitimately say, well, you made these laws, our laws said it was fine, right? So,
that's what Hannah Arendt.
right,
So we
right,
covered Eichmann in Jerusalem.
yeah,
Hannah Arendt's reporting on the trial of Adolf Eichmann in 1965, I believe it was,
yeah,
in Jerusalem, right,
right,
where the Mossad went. They
right,
snatched him from
right,
some South
yeah,
American somewhere,
right.
Argentina, I think it was.
Argentina,
Yeah, they did snatch a grab. The Mossad did, which is what they're notorious for,
yeah,
and put him on trial in the dock in Jerusalem. And she documented exactly what you're talking about. And one of the points she made, which got her into a lot of trouble with Holocaust survivors in America, and actually it's interesting, the the grandsons and granddaughters of Holocaust survivors still have a problem with Hannah Arendt for bringing this up, but she's not wrong. There was no appeal made to a religious violation or even a moral violation.
right.
The only reason, not the only reason, but the reason why the Eichmann trial was so interesting is because there was a lot of tap dancing in Jerusalem, of all places, around that moral violation. And
Right.
instead, we're merely going to punish this man for the precedent or under the precedent set at the Nuremberg trials, which is, oh, well, you were just following orders. Well, the orders were immoral, so we're going to punish you for
You
following
should have
immoral
known better.
orders. You
Yeah,
should have known better. And
right.
Adolf Eichmann, and she writes about his psychology in Eichmann at Jerusalem. Go listen to the episode we did last year. Go read the book. I would encourage every leader here to read it. But she writes about how when you look at Eichmann, if you do a psychological profile on Eichmann, he was just a civil service bureaucrat.
Yeah, he came across like a mid-level marketing manager. Not no knock on marketing managers,
No,
by
no,
the way.
no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. Let's be very,
Tom,
very, very
if you're
clear,
listening
right?
to this.
Let's be very, very clear. Like,
When
did
I look at Tom Libby though, when the light
let's
catches him just so,
okay, all
just be a
right.
little Eichmann. I'm kidding, Tom. I
Oh,
am so kidding. I am so
stop,
joking.
stop, stop, stop. Tom's a good man. Tom doesn't deserve
Tom
that.
is a great guy.
Tom's a great guy. Um, the thing with Eichmann is, and the thing, and by the way, I think this is going to be a real problem with AI, is you will have orders from nowhere, right? Orders with
Sure. Yeah.
nobody behind them, right? Because no appeal can be made, and thus decisions were made, but not by me. That's its own form of, and I'm going to draw a parallel here, bureaucratized anarchy.
Sure. How do you
And
put AI in jail? How do you fire AI? How do
how
you
how do
scold
you
AI?
we're very much consumed with how do we prevent AI from getting control of name your weapon here or name your military system here. I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about how do you how do you prevent the human in the loop from consciously abandoning accountability and responsibility because it's just easier, because we've proven it over the last 80 years, it's just easier to sort of say I was following orders,
Right.
shrug my shoulders, and be a mini anarchist myself.
Right.
And by the way, we have evidence of mini anarchism. We have mini anarchism in our families. We have mini anarchism in our communities. We have mini anarchists in our workplaces. You know, we have people who, without a a a Chesterton's fence of morality,
Right.
based on God, which is what Chesterton would say you need to base it on, whether it's your Catholic conception, your Jewish conception. He probably wouldn't be in favor of the Islamic conception, but he would be probably begrudgingly be like, okay, at least it's something. You have to have a conception of a higher transcendent power that puts a fence around you. Otherwise,
So, you know,
let it go.
it's what I do for a living, right? I work on a
Yeah.
lot of grants for a lot of different projects, and I'm
Yeah.
not gonna go into any detail because I like to say I'm under so many NDAs I can't even talk in my sleep. But I can tell you that there are a lot of projects that are currently trying to find their way through the the how to use AI in a medical context in such a way that it's not making, say, the ultimate medical decision, but it kind of is, right? So, and you can see you can see it eroding. In the time that I've been doing this, I'm watching it eroding. There used to be a very fixed line, like it had to come down to essentially, is the AI giving you advice? Like, gee, that sounds like a cough, right? So there's a lot of people have wearables, right? I don't happen
Mm-hmm.
to have them, but
Yeah.
I have nothing against it. I just don't happen to wear one.
Yeah.
Um, and that wearable is continually transmitting information about the wearer. And sometimes it will say the information will be, wow, your heart rate seems to be like 260. That's really high. You might want to go to an ER, you know, to see what's going.
Just
That's
might want
unusually
to.
high. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's for those listening at home, that's high.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So if your heart rate is 260 and you're listening to this, go to the emergency room. Do
Turn this
not
off and
do
go
not
directly.
turn this off and go directly to the ER, right? But so the and that sort of advice giving, which is generally okay and goes down a certain track through the FDA, which is a relatively easy track to get down. And then there are ones where you might say, well, your heart rate is 260, you should take this pill. That's a little closer to telling you, giving you something. And then finally, it's not too far from that to your heart rate is 260, and I can inject this medication into you, and I'm going to do it without you saying yes or no, or a doctor saying yes or no. Um, that's doable today. It's not out there, to my knowledge anyway, but it's you got to wonder when we'll cross that line.
So I am watching with trepidation the development of the casual acceptance of euthanasia
Sure. Yep.
with growing horror. And it's one of those areas where both the Jewish rabbi and the Christian evangelist should make common cause, because when the AI is infused with that sort of ability to pattern recognize ruthlessly to an end and can then advise humans in what to do, humans with no guardrails are going to follow what the AI says. And we talk a lot as Christians, particularly in the last 50 years, we talked a lot in the bookends of Roe v. Wade. We talked a lot about abortion and beginning of life issues in this
Right.
country. And I believe it is becoming more critical. I think it will become more critical over the next 25 years to begin to talk about end of life issues.
What if the
And
person doesn't even
this,
realize they're talking to an AI?
right. And this is going to go directly to suffering. This is going to go directly to meaning. This is going to go directly to autonomy and agency.
Okay.
All of these areas that make us really uncomfortable And we don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk publicly about. And yet we have governments. I'm looking at you, Canada. I'm looking at you, state of New York. I'm looking at you, soon to be Oregon and California. I'm looking directly at you all now. We have lawmakers who are saying, well, we'll just sort of set up the rails here, and
I'm
you all can
sure it
do
will
what
be
you want.
fine.
I'm sure we'll be fine.
Yeah.
And that's just another example of, in my mind, it's just another example of anarchy. It's just another example of Chesterton opposed anarchy because, yes, anarchy comes directly from nihilism at a social level. I think he would also approach or oppose anarchy because anarchy at a personal level leads to the deception of autonomy, the deceptive idea that you are an autonomous being that can make their own choices even out to death. And it removes at the smallest level, the Tolkien level, or even the C.S. Lewis level, it removes from individuals the ability to behave heroically. Why would I behave heroically if I can just, like on Futurama, that great cartoon from Matt Groening, I can just go into a suicide booth on the street corner and just be gone? I don't think we're far away
I've
from
never
that.
watched. Is that true? Is that a thing in it?
Oh yeah, that was a thing in the cartoon. Yeah, Groening called it like 15, 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the jokes that's one of the jokes in that cartoon. You could
Yeah.
just, there's suicide booths on every corner, and if you want, you just
Oh
go.
my gosh. Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah.
Oh dear. Well, but I mean, we're not that far away from that conception. Um, and being advised and nudged by AI,
There
right?
is a, isn't there a booth that you could, I'm not making this up, that will basically fill with nitrogen gas and kill you?
Mhm.
I think someone in Switzerland died
Yep.
from that matter.
Well, and I'm seeing, I don't want to go too far down this road, but I'm seeing that it's a concern that I have. It's a growing
Sure.
concern. And when I read books like The Man Who Was Thursday, and then I look at how little we have sort of updated our moral code
Right.
in the last 120 some odd years. Um, but we've updated our technology to help us do immoral things faster and
Right.
better. Right. And where is that morality going to come from, and who is going to speak up for it? And that, of course, is the role of the apologist. That's the role of Chesterton, is to speak up for that morality. Um, and um, and to well, again, I'm going to bring up William F. Buckley here, to stand athwart history and yell stop
Right.
as loudly as you possibly can.
Right.
All right, back to the book. Back
Back
to
to the book.
The Man Who Was Thursday. So I'm going to go to chapter 5, The Feast of Fear. The Feast of Fear is an interesting little bon mot, where Syme goes to a breakfast of anarchists that is being held in a restaurant on a balcony overlooking Leicester Square. I'm probably mispronouncing that terribly. And and he sees several archetypes while he's at this breakfast, and I want to run through a few of them to sort of draw a parallel. At one corner of the square, they projected a kind of angle of a prosperous but quiet hotel, the bulk of which belonged to a street behind. In the wall, there was one large French window, probably the window of a large coffee room. And outside this window, almost literally overhanging the square, was a formidably buttressed balcony, big enough to contain a dining table. In fact, it did contain a dining table, or more strictly, a breakfast table. And round the breakfast table, glowing in the sunlight and evident to the street, were a group of noisy and talkative men, all dressed in the insolence of fashion, with white waistcoats and expensive buttonholes. Some of their jokes could almost be heard across the square. Then the grave secretary gave his unnatural smile, and Syme knew that this boisterous breakfast party was the secret conclave of the European dynamiters. Then, as Syme continued to stare at them, he saw something that he had not seen before. He had not seen it literally because it was too large to see. At the nearest end of the balcony, blocking up a great part of the perspective, was the back of a great mountain of a man. When Syme had seen him, his first thought was that the weight of him must break down the balcony of stone. His vastness did not lie only in the fact that he was abnormally tall and quite incredibly fat. This man was planned enormously in his original proportions, like a statue carved deliberately as colossal. His head, crowned with white hair, as seen from behind, looked bigger than a head ought to be. The ears that stood out from him looked larger than human ears. He was enlarged terribly to scale, and the sense of size was so staggering that when Syme saw him, all the other figures seemed quite suddenly to dwindle and become dwarfish. They were still sitting there as before with their flowers and frock coats, but now it looked as if the big man was entertaining 5 children to tea. Syme never thought of asking whether the monstrous man who almost filled and broke the balcony was the great president of whom the others stood in awe. He knew it was so, with an unaccountable but instantaneous certainty. Syme indeed was one of those men who were open to all the more nameless psychological influences, in a degree a little dangerous to mental health. Utterly devoid of fear and physical dangers, he was a great deal too sensitive to the smell of spiritual evil. Twice already that night, little unmeaning things had peeped out at him almost prurently and given him a sense of drawing nearer and nearer to the headquarters of hell. And this sense became overpowering as he drew nearer to the great president. And then I'm going to skip down here for just a second. In the presence of the president, the whole company looked sufficiently commonplace. Nothing about them caught the eye at first, except that by the president's caprice, they had been dressed up with a festive respectability, which gave the meal the look of a wedding breakfast. One man indeed stood out at even a superficial glance. He, at least, was the common or garden dynamiter. He wore indeed the high white collar and satin tie that were the uniform of the occasion, but out of this collar there sprang a head quite unmanageable and quite unmistakable, a bewildering bush of brown hair and a beard that almost obscured the eyes like those of a Skye Terrier. But the eyes did look out of the tangle, and they were the sad eyes of some Russian serf. The effect of this figure was not terribly like that of the president, but it had every diablerie that can come from the utterly grotesque. If out of that stiff tie and collar there had come abruptly the head of a cat or dog, it could not have been a more idiotic contrast. And he goes through every single one of the dynamiters and describes their physicality. And there's a link that Chesterton is making here from physicality and physical structure all the way into respectability. And this is an interesting point because Chesterton was a classicist, just like every great Englishman was of his era. And we as Americans in the 21st century claim that we do not see class, claim that we do not acknowledge class, and yet we are all classicists to one level or another. Yeah, sure. Bill Gates runs around wearing a grandpa sweater and, chino slacks.
Right.
But no one's going to mistake him for being your grandpa wearing chino slacks. And with that being said, the great thing of America, the great thing that we can construct on, I think, is that everybody here wants to be middle class, but no one in Chesterton's time wanted to be. Everyone wanted to be upper class.
Right.
And that is where anarchists hid. They hid in the upper classes, which, of course, Chesterton's making.
Did they hide there, or did the upper classes produce them?
Well, I think Chesterton's offering the question. I think he's asserting a problem with class and money. And that's the chicken or the egg question that he doesn't know the answer to.
I mean, you look at the Bolsheviks, right? A lot of them were intellectual bourgeoisie types. They were not the proletariat.
Correct.
Yeah. There's, do you know the Basketball Diaries by Jim Carroll? Did you ever read that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they made it into a movie. There's a great line in that somewhere where Jim Carroll, for like 5 seconds, thinks he's a communist, and he comes to his father and he says, "I'm a proletariat." And the father says, "I'm the proletariat." And he goes, "And I think those guys are crazy." He goes, "Let me tell you who the proletariat is. This guy right here."
This guy right here. Yeah.
So I think that partially what produces your anarchists, and to a certain extent your terrorists, I'm thinking maybe a little bit about like Patty Hearst here, is privilege in a way, because material stuff is boring in the end. You get bored. There's only so much TV you can watch. There's only so many, I guess, great, cars you can drive and so on and so forth. And there's a hollowness at the center of it. And I think people seek to fill that hollowness. I think this is one of the, I know we keep getting dragged back to the modern world. We're trying to go back to 1908, but one of the horrible things about the modern world is people are filled with entertainment all the time and they're bored silly.
Hmm.
And they're looking, they almost don't know anymore what it is to feel anything. And so they go to these ridiculous extremes like, I'm going to blow something up just because it's sort of, I'm going to feel something when I do it. And, but even back in the beginning of the 20th century, you tended to find, your anarchists and your revolutionaries and your bomb throwers kind of among the upper classes. And but you're bang on about America today. I mean, I don't think anybody really wants to be, except for a very few, wants to be no, I like to say the goal is rich, not famous. Right? You don't want to be
Right.
known. In the age
Right.
of the internet, I think fame is a curse. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're onto something there. Um, and
you said on a podcast being
you said
broadcast to everyone. Yeah.
everybody. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so well, there's fame and then there's
Yeah. Yeah.
influence,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's the
Right.
distinction with the difference, right? So I'm not podcasting to be an influencer.
Right.
I'm not even podcasting to be famous. I'm podcasting because I like having interesting
Yeah.
conversations
This
with
is just
people
cool. Yeah. It's just fun. Yeah.
and having other people listen in on those and get some insights and move on with the rest of their
Sure.
lives. That's why we're here.
Right.
Um, I think that, and it's interesting when you talk about anything that's an ism or an ist, a theory or an idea, that always captures people with enough wealth to be comfortable. So the example that proves the rule is Virginia Woolf, right? Virginia Woolf was wealthy enough to be a feminist, and to complain and to deconstruct, and all of that. And of course, she was wealthy enough to resist attempts to improve her talent and resist critiques of her talent.
Right.
And you can see sort of not really an archetype, but the beginning of the archetype of the Virginia Woolf feminist in Ford Maddox Ford's Parade's End, right? And he ran into a lot of those folks. So did Hemingway, by the way. A lot of those people, right? And so that specific type that you're talking about, even today in our era, resists critique, resists correction, and has enough money to be able to. Rob Henderson talks about this, the great blogger and writer, talks about luxury beliefs. They have enough money to be able to adopt these beliefs of how the
Or you
world,
can
quote
believe
unquote,
crazy
should work.
things
You
because
can
it
believe
doesn't really
crazy things.
affect you. Yeah.
Right, because you never experience the consequences of the crazy
Right.
things. The problem is, and this is what Chesterton objects to in the anarchists, is that the average people don't have the protections that you have based on your wealth. And so what happens when you throw a bomb is an average person gets blown up.
Right.
So going back to just one more time, Osama bin Laden came from wealth.
Right. Extreme
Not a
wealth.
surprise.
Crazy
Not a
wealth.
surprise.
Yeah.
Crazy wealth.
Yeah.
Crazy wealth.
Right.
Um, most of the folks, and of course, wealth is proximal, right? Most of the folks who are, quite frankly, the true believers in Hamas, or any other anarchist movement, those people have enough money to survive.
And they're not living in Gaza, by the way. They're living in Qatar. Yeah. So there was something about this, I can't go searching through the book right now, but he was talking about exactly that. Chesterton was, where essentially, the people that pay the price for these he didn't call them luxury beliefs, but is the average person, right? I'll find
Mm-hmm.
it maybe if I don't find it here while we're talking, I'll find it later and I'll send it to you. But you also see this quite a bit in the terrorist groups of the 60s and 70s, which were before your time, but I was scared of every time I got on an airplane, even as a kid, right? They were the interesting things is they all started off as sort of some kind of national or some what they would say social justice or national justice movement, and they all ended up being criminal gangs in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Chesterton talks about this at some point that it just becomes mere criminality in the end. The IRA started on what I'm not versed enough in the politics of England and Ireland to say whether they were just or not just. I'm not the person to get into all that. But I think by the end, it was more like, well, we need money, so let's go rob a bank, as opposed to, that bank is we're robbing that bank because it's, the Bank of England or, something like that.
Frank
It's in here
Frank
somewhere. I saw it and I meant to mark it, and of course I didn't.
That's okay.
Yeah,
You'll search the book as I
yeah,
bring
I'll
up
find it.
an
Yeah,
additional sort of example to back this
right,
up. Frank Miller, who was the comic book writer back in the 1980s and artist, he did bunch of work on Daredevil. He also resurrected Batman in the 80s, which eventually became the Batman that we now know as Batman, the grim, gritty Batman. That was
right.
Frank Miller's contribution to the
Yeah,
mythos.
I love
But
that Batman.
oh yeah. But in the Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller talks about, or he sets up a scene right in that graphic novel where Superman is reflecting. By the way, Superman is a government agent, fully completely co-opted by the U.S. government.
Okay.
But Superman is reflecting. Clark Kent is reflecting on the subcommittee hearings that were held about superheroes, right? That eventually stripped all the superheroes of their identity, right? And they called up Bruce Wayne, right? And and Superman thinks in retrospect, Bruce sat up there as Bruce Wayne would do, and the senators asked him, what's the difference between you and a criminal? And I'm paraphrasing this. You can go find it in The Dark Knight Returns. It's a great little sequence. And Superman thinks Bruce laughed his scary laugh like he always does. And Bruce said, Senator, we've always been criminals. Like we're never not. And then he walked out of that Senate subcommittee, and he could have made all the moms and the kids happy, but
Yeah,
that Bruce wasn't going to do that. And then he
yeah,
got
yeah.
into his
You knew
race
the right thing
car.
to say, or what they wanted to hear. Right.
That's
Yeah.
right. And Bruce got into his race car and drove away.
Right.
And that's the fundamental difference between, and this is what we, in the Dark Knight quote that I brought forward, right? If you're going to go battle with anarchists, if you're going to go battle with demons, right? If you're going to, let's go all Nietzschean for just a minute. If you're going to stare into the abyss and allow the abyss to stare back through you, if you're going to actually do that, not philosophically, but practically, well, you have to get down in the dirt with these people. And again, this is where, as when I'm thinking about the dark side of leadership, and I guess maybe that's the subtext of this episode today. Chesterton understood what the dark side of that was and what that actually meant, as anybody does who understands what good is. So in order to understand good, you have to understand evil, and you have to be willing to accept what evil is. And I think a lot of people in our time play footsie with evil, just like the Germans played footsie with the Russians about oil and natural gas for years and years, and then were somehow
Right.
magically shocked that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and
Right.
their natural gas supply got cut off.
Right.
You were playing footsie with him for 15 years. Who did you think you were dealing with?
Sure.
Like, what are we talking about? But average people don't, they're unwilling to accept that there's that level of depravity inside of people. And then here's the other thing, they are unwilling to accept, and maybe they should be unwilling to accept. I'm not saying average people have to go this far, but you have to be willing to accept what it is that it takes to actually root out that depravity.
Right. See, we're under
And
this
it's
bizarre
hard.
impression in the West that good will win because it's so easy on TV. The good guys always
Right.
win, right?
Yeah.
That it's really costless and bloodless and doesn't involve actual sacrifice, and that, it's quite astonishing. And in some ways, you could almost argue that that is the way that we are being attacked is essentially our own values used to just do jujitsu us on us in a way,
There you go.
right? And it's yeah, it's I have one one political maxim that I kind of keep to in the back of my mind at all times, and it goes like this: if someone says they want to kill you, believe them.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
they
It's
do
very
want to kill you.
simple.
Yeah,
They do want to kill you.
they do want to kill you. Yeah,
They do want to kill you.
they
That's
do.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
they're
do.
not just
Right.
expressing some cultural difference. No, they want you
No.
dead.
They want you dead.
They
They
want
want
me
you
dead.
dead.
Yeah.
And actually, I have a very, I agree with that political
Yeah. Yeah.
maxim. And not only, and I go a step further. Okay, well, I'll accommodate you, but I'm not going to just. And it's interesting that you brought up jujitsu. I do jujitsu, right? I've been doing jujitsu for many years, and one of the two principles that sort of involved in that hobby, such as it were, because I don't compete professionally, I have zero interest in doing that. I like challenging the professionals and giving them fits, but I don't feel like I need to go compete myself.
Right.
But what you find out in I learned a lot of lessons in jiu-jitsu, and I always talk about it at least once on the show every episode because it's been so impactful, and here we are.
Right.
But you have to get in close, and the enemy gets a vote. And if you're afraid to get in close, and if you're afraid that if you want it to all work out optimally for yourself, you're foolish.
Yeah.
You're just foolish.
Yeah.
Right. So like I'll see, this drives my wife crazy, but people will talk about, and we talk about this in my jiu-jitsu gym, but like my wife will be like, oh, well, this person over here, da, 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 or whatever, that person over there. Not could you take them? She doesn't ask me that kind of way, but she's like, well, if things happen, da, 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 like, what are you going to do? Like, it doesn't matter. I'm not worried about what they are going to do. I'm not worried about the 250-pound guy who's like 2% body fat. I'm not worried about what he's going to do. I'm worried about what I'm going to do in that situation because he's going to get a vote.
See that, by the way, in one of the things I love about, I mean, you and I both love basketball, right?
Yeah.
In the NBA, I think when an NBA player is playing at the top of his game, I don't think he even sees the defense.
No.
I don't think it doesn't matter what they're doing. It doesn't matter. It's almost part of the, and this is kind of like a less, it's not, you're not trying to kill the other person, you're just trying to beat them.
Right.
But I think that's one of the most amazing things when you see players get into that zone where I don't think they're even seeing the other team. They don't even care.
Yep.
Right.
It's called the I heard this term used, and I think I'm using it correctly here. It's called the zone of proximal development.
Right.
Where or I call it the flow zone, right? So if I'm going with somebody and I'm not thinking and things are just going, he just like made this thing suck for me on this joint.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter because I'm going to do this thing over to here. Like I'm thinking of, I was just in a role a few days ago. This is a small anecdote. Just in a role a few days ago with somebody who's significantly smaller than me and female, but she's of a higher rank. So she's a real problem to deal with. And so all of the natural things that I would do, the natural advantages that I would have of size, of weight, of speed or whatever, I have to put all those aside because otherwise it's not going to be competitive for her. Right. And so we're going, and she put this, it doesn't matter what it's called a baseball choke, but she put this choke on me. And I'm watching this happen in real time. Like I watched her put the hand in, I watched her sink it, and she's like trying to sink it and trying to sink it and trying to sink it. And I'm thinking, well, this currently sucks, but I could go over there on that side of her.
Right.
And so all I have to do is just survive this amount of suck here to get to the other side over there. Let me work my way over there.
I said, I know we're riffing all over the place, but
we are riffing all over the place.
You ever watch Seinfeld? Do you ever see the one where?
Oh my gosh, I am the biggest fan of Seinfeld ever, and yes, I know they're in karate with the little
Kramer. You're fighting children.
They're fighting children.
And he goes, Jerry, you fight the belt.
You fight the belt.
I love that.
I know, I love that episode. Oh my gosh, it was so good. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And it's interesting. So like when he was doing that, when that episode came on, I was actually involved in Taekwondo at the time. Right. So I was, and oh my God, that got passed around. Oh my God, that episode got passed around our gym. It was ridiculous.
It's a classic, man.
It's a classic.
Yeah.
Absolute classic.
So let me,
all right.
I'm going to pull this back to Chesterton because I know that's where you want to go. What do you think Chesterton would have thought of the Batman Chronicles?
I think Chesterton would have been disappointed because for as much as the conceptual ideas that we've weighed on Batman, that we've put on Batman, the ways in which they work to defeat nihilism, They aren't Christian at the end of the day. They're not. They don't uphold a Christian ethic. They uphold strength. They
Has there
uphold
ever been a
brutality.
Christian superhero?
I think the closest that you get, and you're asking, I'm a comic book guy. I've been a comic book guy for a long, long time.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
way back.
I yeah, way back. I think the closest you get is Superman. And the joke about Superman is it's a Jesus archetype made by two Jewish kids from Cleveland.
That's right. Yeah.
So
But has there ever been a superhero that like professed a belief in God? And what about this was a little after my time, but
sure.
wasn't there the Watcher? Wasn't he sort of godlike in his sort of like ability to
Yes. So you're talking about Uatu and the Watchers in Marvel Comics.
yeah,
Yeah. Kind of, but comics have always been partially because of the Jewish influence in comics, partially, but also partially because you're attracting artists and creatives
right.
who tend to be more anarchic,
Not religious types, right?
not religious types, right?
Right.
So they tend to shy away from that. Also, I think that if you have a character, and again, the closest that you get is truth, justice in the American way with Superman. That's the closest you're going to get in our denator time. That's the closest you're
I
going to get.
feel like there's a hole there that could be filled by someone who wanted to create a character.
Well, the challenges in our time. So, um, at the business level, comic books don't make any money now. They just don't. They're what do you call it? They're either side things or they're
Right.
part of a side business. Or if you have them as an independent, and there are tons of independent creators that are still making comics
Right.
and digital distribution not sort of, digital distribution destroyed the comic book model, basically. Then you have the dynamic of bad artists. So we went through in the mid 2000s when I jumped out of comics, you could see art changing. So Marvel Comics, once they got acquired by Disney, actually even before that, they stopped accepting submissions from independent artists. So there was a time in the 90s, and I submitted to Marvel, where if you were a good enough artist, you could submit to Marvel and get picked up off the street. You didn't have to go to a convention. You just sent in your samples. I think it was Tom Brevoort was the editor in chief at the time of that outfit. And you would have somebody look at your samples. They would call back. They would, just like if you submitted a manuscript in writing. So they had gatekeepers you could submit. And I
Sure.
knew guys who submitted. There was a guy who worked at a printing company across the street from me who I went and did some art classes with him, and he taught me some stuff about drawing. He submitted to Marvel Comics. I don't remember if he ever got accepted or not, but Marvel, DC, then you had Image came along, Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, Todd McFarlane, and Rob Liefeld, all those boys all came along and blew up sort of the big two idea. But those guys were all genuine artists. They had genuine chops. Even Rob Liefeld, who I didn't particularly care for, I did not particularly care for his art style compared to what happened in the mid 2000s with art in comics. He was a stud. That all collapsed, which allowed manga and other influences to come into Western comic art. And that just has totally, manga and the collapse of the distribution system have totally ruined American comics. And then you
Yeah.
have a third factor in there, which is the Disneyfication of everything. So the second Marvel sold to Disney, um, all of their properties fell underneath the Mouse House. And no one in the Mouse House, no one is talking about God. No one. Because why would they? They could do a theme park without God, which is the whole point, by the way. Everything supports the theme parks, which is what people don't really realize. Yeah, you do $1 billion Avengers movies, but you sell far more tickets to the theme parks. The theme parks are what drive that business.
It's amazing.
So
Yeah, still, I wonder if there's not a niche there for someone, but the because the struggle of the religious man seems, or woman, I didn't mean to make it just about men, um, seems really well. It seems like fertile ground for a superhero, right? Who struggle with you know their the morality of first of all there's the struggle one of the things I always liked about like X-Men for example is just being different, right? You're just
Hmm. Yeah.
it's sort of like well, it went back to every kid in high school who was like different, right?
Yeah.
And then you say, well, what if you took that kid but you gave him superpowers? I'm sure it would be fine. I know what I would have done.
Yeah. And that's the Peter Parker
Much ass would
Spider-Man.
have been kicked, I assure you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's right. Well, and that's the Peter Parker Spider-Man archetype that Steve
Sure.
Ditko and Jack Kirby and Stan Lee came up with. Um Actually more Steve Ditko than Jack Kirby. But I mean, I think you're right. I think there is a hole in the market there. I don't know how you fill it. I don't know if comic books are the correct plug for that hole. Partially because, to your point, or well, not even to your point, I don't know if it's the correct plug to fit that hole because I'm not quite sure that there's a market there anymore among
Right.
individuals who are in the formative years where comics work. So the formative years where my father gave me my first comic book when I've never talked about this on the show before. You just left. Uh-huh. 400 some odd episodes. I've never talked about this before. Might as well talk about it now. But my father gave me my first comic when I was 8 years old, 7, 8 years old. It was a Spider-Man. I can't remember which number. I'm sure it was illustrated by Todd McFarlane. I'm sure it was, or one of the guys that came in pre Todd McFarlane into the Marvel. I wish I had a copy of that freaking comic book. It'd be worth tons now. But that was the first comic book that I ever got, and I can tell you, I'm a Gen Xer, so we were the last generation that really experienced comic book culture as a subculture of nerds and geeks and people who like were doing something that was way off. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Doing something that
For
was
those
way
who are
off
listening,
over
I'm
here.
holding up my hand as a proud member of
The Nerd and Geek Club.
the Nerd and Geek Club. Absolutely.
Exactly. And what we saw in our generation, in our 20s, our late teens and 20s, was the switchover. And more women started coming in, popular culture started coming in. I I don't go to conventions,
Right.
but you see the cosplaying at conventions,
Yeah.
and more normal people are showing up. And then, of course, again, Marvel gets Disney and starts putting out good movies. And by good, I mean not the kind of trash you would have seen in the 80s. You actually start to put together movies that can actually be released. Like the first time I saw Captain America, and the first time I watched Iron Man, that first like Marvel Phase One movies, I thought, holy hell, they're actually going to pull it off. They're actually going to do it. Now, the challenge is they actually did do it. And then, of course, they drained all the water out of the pool because that's what you do if you're
That's what
Disney.
sure.
But with all of that, I thought comics would at least run parallel to that. Nope. It's
Yeah.
it's all dead. So the formative years now of folks are formed by the myths in the movies, not the myths in a 32 page or 16 page or 22 page flimsy magazine.
Right.
Plus, if you don't have distribution, how are you going to get them into people's hands? Because part of the joy of comics is you could go to the grocery, and you experience this. You could go to the drugstore. You could go to the grocery store. They were in the back of the magazine rack. You didn't have dedicated shops like when I was a kid. I had
Right.
dedicated shops. I was
Right.
part of that revolution. The
Right.
shops are almost all gone. Like there's
Right.
no dedicated comic book. Well, there's none, but there's very few dedicated comic book shops still around that are actually doing business and
Yeah.
surviving.
Yeah.
So
It's like record shops. I mean, there's a few around, and you hear people going back to vinyl, but it's the crazy few. It's not. Yeah.
well, vinyl sales crossed $1 billion a couple of weeks ago.
Are you kidding me?
I kid
Then
you
that
not.
is good news, man. I love the idea of vinyl coming out because the commonality between those things was this. There was a culture of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You and
Yeah.
I, if we had known each other as kids, would have been sitting over comic books going,
Oh yeah.
"Oh man, look,"
Look at this.
right. And the same thing with records. You would listen to the records as with your friends, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, in this room I'm sitting in, you don't
Mm-hmm.
do that anymore. In this room I'm sitting in are three sets of headphones. You have headphones on your head, right? Okay. I will
Yeah.
listen to music later by myself. you
Yep.
know. And
Yep.
but it used to be a very communal experience, and you all sat and the record itself, the vinyl record and the sleeve that it came in was part of that really cool experience. I think you and I have talked about this before, so we don't have to go too deeply into it. But I mean, I remember sitting around the Sergeant Pepper's album and going, why is George's hand pointing to that particular piece of text on the back where they printed the lyrics? Why is Paul the one turned around? You debated all these things endlessly, and there was a lot of friendship and um I I want to avoid the word culture, but it keeps coming that came out of it. And now it's all been sort of swept away. But I wonder maybe if some of it is coming back. When you say that vinyl sales have passed $1 billion, maybe that's a harbinger of good things to come.
So let's wrap up this episode. This has been
Okay, all
great.
right.
The man who was Thursday, GK Chesterton. I'm going to ask you a couple questions here,
Sure.
Neal.
Yeah,
Um, um, I think that, but I will say that I no, but I will say this. I'll start my closing comments with this idea. I want to piggyback off of what you just said.
sure.
So one of the reasons I do this podcast for many reasons, but a big reason is I believe in the subversive power of books. And comic books are subversive, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
So are kids cartoons. Oh my god, the subversiveness in Looney Tunes is unbelievable. But books at the end of the day travel across time to people, right? So I read a book now at in my late 40s. That book travels across time on my shelf with an idea in it. And my youngest kid, who's now 9, 30 years from now, picks up that book and he gets a totally different set of ideas, but it's still there. The book is the most subversive document we've got. And you talk about culture, books, vinyl records, and then the digital end podcasts. They become this thing that connects people because at the end of the day, we need mediums to get across messages of restoration and messages of rebuilding. And these subversive mediums can do that, particularly if the dominant culture, to our point on our show today, this has been a running theme, particularly if our dominant culture is denatured or has been deconstructed by people who followed the logic of anarchism and now are done with it. I think anarchism is a spent force. That doesn't mean that I don't think the spirit is still there. That'll always be there. It's part of the human condition. But I think the support for it and the ideas of it are beginning a downward spiral. And what is coming up, what is ascending, is rebuilding and restoration because we've deconstructed enough. And that's one of the other reasons why I do this show, because we've deconstructed enough. We have to know how to build now. We have to figure it out, right?
I love that concept of ideas traveling through time.
Oh, and the book is the best technology we've ever created to have that happen. It's genius.
So, in the spirit of that, if my grandchild 20 years from now is listening to this podcast, go to sleep
Go to sleep. Go to sleep.
and read The Lord of the Rings.
And read the Lord of the Rings. That's right. Yes, that's right.
Not in that order.
Not in that order. um, what should leaders, business leaders, civic leaders, leaders who have managed to get to the end of the podcast with us, this part here, our wanderings, what should they take from the man who was Thursday? What's the big lesson to take from that? What can they apply to their leadership lives?
Oh dear, I have to answer this.
Oh yes. So this is the penultimate question for the guest.
Um, so I think you asked me this last time, and I said
I did.
never despair, right? Was
Yep.
my answer. That's the message of the Lord of the Rings. The message to me, and I don't know if this will help a business leader deciding, what to invest in next week or anything like that, but generally is without God, there is only anarchy. And I think Chesterton um, presented that in a fun, I think he was having fun in The Man Who Was Thursday. I don't think he meant it to be taken all completely seriously, but that things fall apart quickly once you get away from God. And I'm not trying to offer that up as business advice. I think that's but a good business is like a well-lived life. You want it to have a purpose and you want it to adhere to certain rules. And I think ultimately, if you look for what rules you're trying to make your business or your life adhere to, I think whatever your conception of God might be, I think looking there is your best first place to start looking. I think, as we were saying earlier, I said this to my daughter the other day, and I realized it's a long answer to your short question, but if you look to the internet to find your morality or your sense of right and wrong, or even whether you should invest in Tesla or not invest in Tesla, heaven help you, man. Because there is only anarchy out there. You're not going to get your answer because that's the howling winds of chaos. So you have to have that internal sense of again, I'm answering your question in real time, so forgive me if
Mm-hmm.
I'm going on a bit. But one of the things that we have in business, for example, you and I have this. My wife and I talk about this a lot, which is you're hiring people, you're firing people, you're constantly, of course, it's really all about people in the end. And ultimately, usually when you're making a decision about a person, you're basing that on kind of, I mean, yes, you can have their resume in front of you, and yes, you can say, oh, they went to 15 Ivy League schools and they did this and they did that. But ultimately, it's really a gut decision, really, with people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something what I call basically your spider sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which basically says, do I want to be in business with this person? And most of there's a few instances where I did not follow that advice and I came to regret it. And off camera sometime I will tell you that story.
Sure.
It's from many years ago, so it's nothing recent, nothing recent at all, decades back. But there are many times where I did follow that advice, and I found generally it always worked. But what we call spider sense, or just I just had a feeling about someone, I think is another way of expressing something about their really that there was something you had in common with them that resonated. And if you want to put a religious interpretation on that, I don't think that's wrong. So
Excellent.
there you
Yeah,
go, my
no,
friend. That's the best I
there you
can
go.
come up with.
That's actually very, very good. No, that's actually very, very good. I want to thank Neal for coming on our show today and talking with us about The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. Go out and pick up that book and come to your own conclusions. And with that, well, we're out. Order my latest book, 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership, with Bradley Madigan. This book offers insights, ideas, and presents a framework for addressing the most pressing challenges in the postmodern leadership landscape we are navigating today. Pick up the paperback, hardcover, or ebook everywhere you buy books, and leave a review on Amazon. And thanks.